Hey guys, Scott here. Today we're going to go over the perks from the Tools of Torment chapter. How I usually do this is spend a day in a video going over the perks, and then I'll play the killer on the PTP, and then tomorrow I'll have my video on what I think about the killer. From what I've seen, we're not in for something great here, but let's go over the actual perks at the very least. First is Thwack. After hooking a survivor, the next breakable wall or pallet you break will make survivors within 32 meters scream and reveal their aura for 4 seconds. So it lasts for 75 seconds after the survivor is hooked, which is a pretty long time. Pretty much guarantees you're going to get a chance to use it at least once. But the design of the perk is kind of meh because you got to think about it. When do you actually want to see survivors? When do you want to see their aura? And when do you want to know where they are? Typically, it's when you're not actively in a chase. Now, having that information when you're in a chase is nice, and sometimes it'll allow you to break off and start a new chase that's perhaps better for you. But typically, the time you need the aura and the time that you need the reveal of all that information is when you're not in a chase. But the way you activate this perk is when you break a pallet or break a wall, which typically, not always, but typically you do when you're in a chase. So the information it gives is really nice. 32 meters is a pretty large radius for reveals, but it's usually going to come when you're already chasing somebody, which kind of drastically diminishes its value. I can think of some scenarios where there's a breakable wall you haven't kicked yet, or there's an unsafe pallet perhaps you didn't need to kick at that time, where you're going to get some information from this, and that's going to be really good to start a new chase. But usually you're going to be in a chase already, which means you'd have to abandon the chase you're currently in to go find something else, which is not useless, but I don't think really good enough to use. But I wouldn't say it's an unusable perk or anything like that. The next perk for the Skull Merchant is Leverage. Each time you hook a survivor, gain 1 token up to 10. When you hook a survivor, this perk activates. For each token, reduces the speed at which survivors heal by 5% for 30 seconds. So we have a maximum, basically, of a 50% slowdown, and then we have a minimum of 5% for 1 hook. Now, typically, if you have 10 hooks for the 50% slowdown, you've already won the game. The slowdown of heals doesn't really matter anymore. So you're probably going to have somewhere between an average of 10 and 30% over the course of an actual game. Considering this will stack with things like Sloppy Butcher, and you can use it also in tandem with things like Colorophobia, I think this could actually have some decent healing slowdown if you want to play more of that hit and run play styles like a Wraith or a Spirit or something like that. I think this could have a decent amount of value. It only really amounts to a couple of seconds saved per heal, but when you combo that with Sloppy Butcher and things like that, I think you're going to have some pretty annoying anti-heal builds. So I wouldn't be surprised if we had some complaints about this one. But do I think it's overpowered or anything? No, I think the effect is minor enough. It's going to seem like that red bar is awful, but it's basically just like Sloppy Butcher. It's just going to be when we combine it with perks like Sloppy Butcher, then it's going to start to feel pretty annoying. But overall, I think the perk actually has somewhat decent strength. The problem is it takes so long for it to get to that point. You're probably already winning at that point anyway, and you don't need it. So, we'll see. Next is the Game Afoot. When you're chasing the Obsession, this perk activates. Damaging gens and breaking walls or pallets gives you a 5% haste status effect for 10 seconds. When you hit a survivor with the total most time and chase with a basic attack, they become the Obsession, which is interesting because it means the game is tracking basically who is running you the most, which is, cool, because I think we've had something like that for the emblems, but I've always wanted to see like MVP medals or something like that at the end of the match, and it seems like that information's already in the game now, so that could be something to do later. But basically, when you kick a pallet, you're going to go 5% faster for 10 seconds, which in a chase is not super insignificant. I think that's actually somewhat decent, especially if you combo with something like Brutal Strength. You're going to catch up to people a lot faster. Is it going to be enough to stop them to get to the next loop? Because that's really all that matters, right? All that matters is whether or not they get to another tile in time. If that 5% helps you before they get to that tile, then you've gotten immense perk value. If it doesn't really do anything. That being said, I do think this perk is actually not bad. The problem is it only works in the Obsession. If it doesn't work on any other survivor, the value is not super great. I could see people running this with, Nemesis to make the survivor that stuns you the Obsession. Then when you break it, I'm seeing a Nemesis Brutal Strength or Spirit Fury Enduring or something like some synergy between those perks. So I do see where this could have some use. I don't think it's going to be a meta perk or anything like that, but I could definitely see how it has some use. So overall, the Skull Merchant's perks are decent, pretty good, and decent, I guess. I don't think any of them are going to change the meta or anything like that. So don't worry, you're still going to see the same 5-6 perks every match. Now let's go over the survivor perks, starting with Thalita, I think is how you say this. So her first perk is Friendly Competition. Whenever you finish repairing a generator with at least one other survivor, this perk activates. You and the other survivors who finish that gen, you do gens 5% faster for the next 75 seconds. So On its own, any perk that makes you group up with survivors is inherently not good, because what you want to do basically the entire match until there's one gen left is spread out as far as you possibly can from survivors. That's how you win. So the fact that this makes you stick with somebody, not super great, but it's sort of like it's prove thyself, but you can disconnect after a certain point. So let's say the match starts, the killer chases one person, two people hop on a gen with prove thyself, and then they finish that generator, and now they both get to 5% after that. Now those two can spread out and do two separate gens, and they'll both do the gen 5% faster, which is nice. 5% though is, that's like 4 point something seconds. In the grand scheme of things, it's not that much really, but it's not nothing, and anything that enhances gen repair speed is always scary in this game. So at the very least, you could see people throwing this on with their Prove Thyself build, and once they get that first gen done, people will split up and then get the most benefit from that. So I could see this being used for some people. I don't think it's going to be super game-breaking or game-changing, because the amount is only 5%, where Prove Thyself is, obviously significantly more. So I don't really think it's going to be too impactful. But overall, the fact that it allows you to split up after that is actually pretty good, because then you can have two people do most of a generator by themselves and still get most of the benefits. So I think the perk is okay, and the fact that only one person has to run it to get benefits to two people is also pretty good. So I could definitely see people running this. The effect is not super good, so it's not overpowered or anything like that, but anything that makes gens go even a bit faster is always going to be strong. So overall, I think the perk is actually pretty decent. Next is a new genre of perks, kind of like boons and hexes, called Teamwork. Typically, Teamwork requires you to stand next to another person or be very close to another person. Whenever you finish healing another survivor, you both move 5% faster as long as you stay within 12 meters of the survivor you healed, or until one of you loses a health state. This is actually somewhat decent. Now, the problem is you have to stand very close. 12 meters is pretty small, so you have to be basically at the same loop as somebody else. But this is kind of decent if you're trying to protect somebody that's on death hook and you've just, healed them or something like that, and the killer finds them and he's trying to kill them. Moving 5% faster is pretty good. Now, the problem is, for you to maintain this benefit, the other survivor needs to be near you as well, which means the killer is now occupying two people's time at once. So this kind of strikes me as an anti-tunnel perk, because one person has to take themselves out of the match to protect somebody else and give them this 5% speed boost, and basically as soon as that person gets hit, then the boost is gone. So on the one hand, 5% movement speed is actually very significant for a survivor and will make it significantly harder for the killer to get that person. On the other hand, it makes it so the killer is occupying two people at once. So the only time this is ever really useful is when the killer is trying to confirm a kill on the person that you just healed. So I could see this being marginally useful as an anti-tunnel perk, because the killer is kind of going to be forced to hit the other person. Chasing someone that's 5% faster than you is kind of hard. If you ever chase someone with hope, you know how much of an annoyance that can actually be. So this seems like an anti-tunnel perk, and that's kind of all the value it actually has. Our last perk is Cut Loose. After performing a rushed vault in a chase, this perk activates. When this perk is active, your rush vaults are silent for up to 6 seconds, and successfully performing a rush vault during that time resets the timer. So this perk is actually kind of like a reverse quick and quiet. And actually, I think this is the strongest perk out of all the perks we have this entire chapter. I can think of numerous scenarios. If I'm understanding this correctly, I can think of numerous scenarios where this is extremely useful. For example, at the shack, I hear the survivor vault the window. I start leaving shack to go around to the window, but then they fast vault back, and now it's going to be silent, and I'm not going to be able to hear that. So now I'm going to go around, but now they're back inside. If I double back, they can fast vault again. They're going to burn through all of their vaults very fast, but I'm not going to down that survivor. There are a lot of times you can outplay people at shack. This will make it so I'm going to have no information at something like shack, and it's going to be really hard to combat that. So this is going to burn the entity blocker when you vault something 3 times. It's going to happen a lot faster, but it will confuse the killer a lot, and it will get a lot of value. And I actually am probably the most concerned about this perk out of all of them, because I know how to play tiles very well, and this is going to make it so even if I play it well, I don't have the information to react to somebody that's now mind gaming me. So I think Cut Loose is actually going to be a pretty damn strong perk, and probably the strongest perk that I've seen out of all of these perks so far. Next is Renato's perks. The first one is Blood Rush. When healthy, running, and suffering from exhaustion, press the active ability button to lose a health state and recover from exhaustion instantly and gain the broken status effect for 20 seconds. And then after that 20 seconds, you're healed back to full. So this basically gives you a second wind. It gives you a bonus exhaustion perk at the cost of injuring yourself. Now, this is only usable with a couple of exhaustion perks. Obviously, you can't use this with something like Dead Hard because you have to be injured to get that first use, and you have to be healthy to use this. It's not going to work with things like Overcome as well, because if you get hit, then obviously you're not healthy and you can't use it. So it's really only going to be used with like Balanced Landing, Life, and Sprint Burst, and that's pretty much what I can see. Now, I can think of a couple of scenarios where this is actually extremely annoying. For example, if you have a survivor on Haddonfield, for example, and they're on Death Hook. By the way, this only activates if you're on Death Hook. So if they're on Haddonfield and you're chasing them, they drop down, they use their Balanced Landing, they run around the entire building, gain a ton of distance. The killer's going to be in a chase for another 20, 30 seconds. Then they can choose to injure themselves and then get another Balanced Landing and run the house again. And that will take an immense amount of time for the killer to catch up. So much so that they might actually get their full heal off in 20 seconds. And now the killer is super screwed. There's also going to be scenarios where people will sprint burst a very significant distance away, injure themselves, and then sprint burst again a very significant distance away. So you're going to have people stacking. Basically, it's going to be like one of those 3 perks, Life as well. And they're going to use them twice in a chase. And that is going to make it extremely difficult to finish off that survivor who is on Death Hook. So what people are going to do, because this has the potential to be very annoying, what people are going to do is just tunnel the person off the hook so they can never get healthy to begin with, because you have to be healthy for this to be active. You need to be on Death Hook and healthy. So what killers are going to do is just tunnel people off the hook when they're on Death Hook and negate this perk entirely. So this perk actually encourages tunneling immensely because its possible effect is extremely strong, and it punishes killers who play nice because they typically won't. They'll let that guy who's on Death Hook heal, and then this perk actually is usable. So people are just going to tunnel people off of hook when they're on Death Hook and negate the perk entirely. So I don't know what they were thinking with the design of this. It basically encourages tunneling immensely. So yeah, look forward to that. Next is the other teamwork perk. This is basically the same as the other one. You have to stay within that 12 meters after healing someone, but it removes your scratch marks instead. This, I think, is less effective. Typically, if a killer is within 12 meters of you, or I guess the killer doesn't have to be within 12 meters. You just have to be within 12 meters of the person. I think moving faster is infinitely better than not leaving scratch marks. And so I think if you're going to run one or the other, you would want to run Thalita's, which is going to give you that movement speed to protect somebody. I can think of scenarios like on indoor maps, on the game, Larry's, things like that, where this potentially is more useful. But for the most part, I think you're going to get way more use out of the movement speed because that is always going to be useful. Scratch marks are going to be situationally useful. If you have one that does something that's always useful, why not use that one? Now, obviously, you can combine the two, but there are much better builds to make. But it's still interesting if you combine the two. Overall, though, the other one is a lot better. The final perk is also just really terrible design. After you unhook a survivor, break into a sprint, basically you get a 6-second sprint burst when you unhook a survivor. All this means is the killer is just going to be incentivized to tunnel the person that you unhook the most. Typically, when you unhook somebody, you want to be taking hits for them. You want to be in the way. You don't want them to get tunneled off the hook. You want to try to prevent that as much as possible. All this perk does is make it so you just go somewhere else much faster. The killer's going to see you go a mile away and go, I guess I'll tunnel this guy then. This perk is designed for killers to tunnel the person off the hook. What this perk should do is give the person that you unhook 6 seconds of a sprint burst. That would be immensely useful, actually. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they changed that before the perk actually releases, because that would be extremely good for anti-tunnel, because you've got that already existing borrowed time movement speed bonus. Then you give them a 6-second sprint burst on top of that. They're going to get really, really far away. And that's honestly really nice. So if they change the perk to work like that, this will suddenly be a very well-designed and great perk. How it is right now, it is horrible design. All it does is encourage tunneling. So overall, those are the perks. Cut Loose is the one I'm scared the most about. I think that has the most potential to be very useful every single game. The exhaustion reset is also potentially very annoying, but it's countered by tunneling. A lot of these perks incentivize tunneling, which is weird, but then some of them also combat tunneling. I don't know. It's sort of a mixed bag. I think some of them are interesting. Overall, the perks are kind of interesting, but yeah, not the greatest. Not the greatest. So next video, we'll go over the actual killer, which, yeah.